Hello, welcome to the Odd Speakers YouTube channel. Today, we've prepared an audiobook based on a column written for the Yongsan newspaper by Australian lawyer Adrienne Park. The topic of today's audiobook is someone who was truly irreplaceable in modern South Korea. Chairman Lee Byung-chul, the founder of the Samsung Empire.
Before we jump into this incredible story, let's take a quick look at the author of the original column. Adrienne is a practicing legal professional and CEO. She currently serves as a member of the Privacy and Data Committee at the Law Society of New South Wales, Australia, an advisory board member for Korail, that's the Korea Railroad Corporation, and an evaluation panelist for government ministries and public agencies. On top of that, as the head of a publishing house, she leads personal branding initiatives for medical doctors, politicians, and attorneys. Truly remarkable, isn't she? Now, before we dive into today's story, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
So listen to these words, delivered by Chairman Lee at a semiconductor meeting back on October 1st, 1983. He said, "Set ambitious goals, but make realistic plans." He warned that a plan bringing immediate profit but future harm is utterly useless. Now, while people in their 40s might remember him really well, younger generations might not fully grasp his impact. He was an absolute visionary whose foundation helped place South Korea on the global stage. But as you'll see in a moment, he actually wasn't always this laser-focused leader.
Chapter 1. The Wandering Youth's Awakening.
It might actually surprise you to learn that the man who built an entire empire didn't start out with some grand master plan. Nope. Despite being born in Uhireong, a region pretty famous for producing some of Korea's greatest business founders, and growing up in a very wealthy family, his early years were, well, far from disciplined. He went off to study at the prestigious Waseda University in Japan, but he ended up dropping out. When he returned to his hometown, he spent years just wandering around, totally lost in gambling. He was, by all accounts, living the life of an aimless playboy, completely disconnected from any sort of grand ambition.
So what on earth changed? The turning point actually wasn't a sudden business epiphany at all. It was a deeply personal, really emotional moment. One night, he looked down at his sleeping children, and that simple, quiet sight triggered this massive awakening within him. He looked back at his wasted years and decided right then and there to completely turn his life around and walk the path of a businessman.
Chapter 2. The First Complete Bankruptcy.
You know, there's a common misconception out there that because Lee came from wealth, he never faced real hardship and just kind of used his parents' money to easily build Samsung. But his real business education came from devastating failure. Back in 1936, he partnered with some friends to start a rice mill in Masan, which was a huge hub for exporting Korean rice to Japan, and it was a massive hit. Empowered by this, he aggressively borrowed money to buy up land and even acquire a large transport company. He amassed a staggering 2 million pyong of rice paddies. I mean, it looked like an absolute runaway success.
But that success? It vanished in a literal instant. Just 1 year later, in 1937, the Sino-Japanese War broke out. Suddenly, bank loans were completely frozen, and the banks demanded immediate repayment of his existing debts. Because Lee had expanded using really aggressive debt, his cash flow was instantly severed. He had to fire sale all his land, the rice mill, the transport company, the whole shebang, for mere pennies. Once the debts were finally cleared, he didn't have a single cent left to his name. It was complete and utter ruin.
Chapter 3. Samsung Sangho, a successful rebound.
So how do you even respond to total ruin? Well, he learned a brutal but absolutely invaluable lesson. A businessman has to know how to read the times, and you simply cannot aggressively expand a business on excessive debt. Instead of just giving up, he took the few hundred won he had left and went on a 2-month scouting trip across Korea, Manchuria, and Beijing. He did intense, boots-on-the-ground market research and discovered this massive demand in Manchuria and China for Korean fruit and fish. Acting on this data, in 1938, he launched Samsung Sangho and Daegu to export these local specialties. And guys, this was the true starting point of the Samsung we know today.
This brilliantly illustrates the power of learning from your failures. Because he had experienced that absolute nightmare of debt-fueled bankruptcy, he ran Samsung Sangho strictly as a cash-only operation, no exceptions. And because he actually understood the mechanics of his past failure, his new startup became an explosive success, allowing him to bounce back in just 1 single year.
Now, it's one thing to say a 20-something can bounce back from a failure, right? But ask yourself this. What if you lost absolutely everything you had built, all over again, at the age of 40? Could you find the strength to stand back up? Because that is exactly what happened to Chairman Lee next.
Chapter 4.
everything lost to war.
Just 13 years after he miraculously rebuilt his life from that first bankruptcy, the 1950 Korean War erupted. The flames of war turned everything he had painstakingly built right back into ashes. Stripped of everything once again, he fled Seoul and took refuge down in Daegu. But when he got there, he found something incredible. An employee he had entrusted with the Daegu Samsung Sangho before the war hadn't fled. Despite the bloodshed and total chaos all around, this man stayed behind to protect the store and the factory. His name was Lee Chang-up, a man who would actually later become the president of Cheilmojik.
And get this, Lee Chang-up hadn't just guarded the property, he had kept the noodle factory running throughout the entire war. When Lee Byung-chul arrived, he was handed a staggering 300 million won in cash, accumulated from the factory and brewery dividends. To put that into perspective, without this unbelievable loyalty and this absolutely vital seed money, the Samsung we know today would simply not exist.
Chapter 5. The Leap from Trade to Manufacturing. Armed with this miraculous lifeline, Lee frantically dashed to Busan. In January 1951, he established Samsung Mulsan. To secure the most desperately needed supplies during the war, he jumped back into the trading business, initially gathering and exporting scrap metal, squid, and honey. He then used the money from those exports to import critical goods like sugar, fertilizer, and medicine back into the domestic market. The success was completely explosive. In just 1 year, Samsung Mulsan became the 7th largest trading company in the entire country, and its capital grew by an astonishing 60 times.
But you know what? Lee wasn't satisfied. He realized the inherent limits of just buying and selling goods cheaply, so he made a really brilliant pivot. He decided to replace the goods they were entirely importing with domestically produced ones. In 1953, he founded Cheil-Jadang to mass-produce sugar, and in 1954, Cheilmojik to produce domestic textiles. This pivot perfectly aligned with the post-war government's protectionist policies, giving Samsung the ultimate springboard to become a massive conglomerate.
Chapter 6. The Great Legacy Left by Failure. All of these catastrophic losses wasn't just bad luck. They were literally the forge that created his ultimate success. As he later wrote in his autobiography, "Trials and failures in human life are inevitable. What matters is not the fact that you failed, but how accurately you analyze the cause of failure and make it an asset for your next challenge. If you are paralyzed by the fear of starting something new or terrified of what others might think, this is absolutely the mindset you need to adopt."
The original column leaves us with this really powerful metaphor. It says, life is like an arrow. Your 20s are the moment before the arrow is released, but once it leaves your fingertips, it flies across the sky toward its target in a flash, a journey of perhaps only 80 years. If you waste your precious youth on fleeting pleasures and aimless wandering, kind of like Lee once did before his big awakening, your future will be pretty bleak. But if you focus, analyze your failures, and aim true, you can build something truly extraordinary.
Before we wrap up, ask yourself, how will you analyze your next failure? And where exactly are you aiming the arrow of your life right now? How did you enjoy today's story? Did you find it interesting? If today's audiobook sparked new motivation or left you feeling energized, please remember to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Thank you so much for learning with us today on this explainer